One of the biggest surprises was us discovering that one employee who we thought was our best in that department was actually our worst. And our worst employee at that time in that same department, who we thought we might need to get rid of, was actually our best employee. So in 2009, we decided to go remote because of the financial crisis. The housing market had crashed, and bigger recession, and we needed to save money. And so going remote was a way that we could save money, and we didn't do it for all of the wonderful reasons that we discovered that remote work could bring us. It was purely a financial decision in 2009. And that, along with me making the decision that I was going to focus on my people as my number one job as the CEO, not our P&L, not our products and services, not all the other things that I had been doing up to that point, that I was going to spend all my time. How do I help them work more efficiently? How do I get out of their way? How do I give them more empowerment and those things? So it was sort of a hand in hand process. But I think it's for as well known as we have become for remote work, and as much that we do in the remote work space, I always find it quite funny that we only did it to save money to start with. Yeah, I think that one of the biggest challenges was we had to redesign how we were going to work. So we knew we liked remote work. So within 2 weeks of going remote, every employee had called me and said, "I absolutely love this. I don't ever want to go back to in the office. Can we keep this permanently?" Because we weren't sure at that time if this was going to be a temporary fix or this was going to be a permanent thing. And so we all knew right away that we loved this, that we had deep time to think. We had this wonderful space to get our work done, flexibility. We all could control our own thermostat. We weren't, arguing over if it was too hot or too cold in the office, right? We all could take control of our workspaces in really unique ways. But we had to redesign how to work together. And so, suddenly if you're sending more emails when you used to just walk out into the cubicle farm and just talk to people, right? Now you had to send 15 emails. That's a really inefficient process. That's a really, sort of negative part of it. So we had to find new ways to meet, new ways to communicate, and new ways to move information around the company and make decisions. One of the biggest surprises was us discovering that one employee who we thought was our best in that department was actually our worst. And our worst employee at that time in that same department, who we thought we might need to get rid of, was actually our best employee. I mean, can you imagine that sort of shock that, you had this totally wrong, and it's because the poor process, the poor way in which things were structured that allowed this sort of to happen. So to give everyone context, who hasn't read the book, we do verifications. We call and do employment verifications and education verifications or references. And in the old days, we used to just put these files in a big, box on a table, and people would come and grab a handful and they would go and work on them. As it turns out, the person we thought was our best employee was cherry picking, was going in there and taking all the easiest ones out of the basket. And because she was this really well-liked person who brought baked goods for everyone, and everyone really liked her, no one ever complained that she took all the easiest work out of the basket. And we had another employee who was, because she really liked doing a good job, she really enjoyed the satisfaction of getting the really difficult ones done, she was taking the most difficult. But when you look at that on paper, you say, "What, this person's doing 20 verifications an hour and this one's doing 5 an hour," right? On that basis alone, you would say, well, one is good and one is bad. But we didn't have the clarity to understand what was really happening. So when we went remote, we started handing those out digitally, but very democratically, right? They weren't given to anyone for any particular reason. They were just randomly assigned. And all of a sudden, that person went way down, and the other person went way up. And we went, wow, the democratization of work, having better ways to measure people, was really something that we needed to have that to help us be more successful. Well, beware of anyone saying that remote work is killing company culture, because that is absolute crap. That we've never had better culture. And in fact, if you look at organizations that are using remote work well, their cultures are fantastic. I mean, I could certainly give you a lot of examples. So where we're seeing people struggle is either A, their culture already was terrible, was already, having a problem. Remote work will actually exacerbate that. So going remote makes culture sort of a little bit more obvious. So if your culture before was ping pong tables and your and beer Friday and your boss, holding you prisoner inside meetings all the time, for a lot of people that's the reality. Going remote undoes a lot of that, but if you don't replace it with something, positive, it can really hurt them. So there's a lot of companies that went remote because they had to. They weren't planning on it. They didn't do anything to help their people, and that suffered. The other thing to remember is that for most people, how you feel about your team, how you would rate your team, the people that you work with on a day-to-day basis, is often a parallel to how you would rate your company. So very, very, very infrequently do we ever see anyone say, I give my manager a 10 out of 10, but my company's a 2. That just doesn't happen. Like if they're really happy with their boss and they're really happy with their team, they're really happy with the company overall. So if organizations think that their culture is anyway suffering or having a hard time, they need to just go back and focus on the micro teams that people are in and help those teams be more successful, help them be more productive, help them with better communication strategies, often help them to set boundaries on how much they're working. And then they'll see their culture sort of reviews or all that go. I will say one last thing is I have seen a lot of organizations intentionally saying all of these really inflammatory things about remote work because they don't want to be remote and their employees do. So they went remote because they had to. And then they said, okay, everyone, it's time to come back. And they went, hell no, we don't want to come back. and so they were like, what are we going to do now? We had this giant office space and we all wanted to be back in the office. We as the senior leaders want to be back in the office, but our employees don't. And so they begin this, well, remote's bad for culture. It's bad for this. It's bad for that. And you can see, if you look at these articles where it's been anything negative and you look at the people who they're getting quotes from, these are people who've been very vocal about not wanting remote work or wanting to come back to the office.